In the north, people say the cold does not come from snow alone. It comes from vows betrayed in silence, from names that should have died long ago but are still called through the dark, from gods who hung themselves upon the world tree to see too far, only to fail at saving the things they loved. At winter feasts, the old skalds like to say that fate is a thread already spun, and that men need only walk beside it as one walks the lip of a frozen cliff between two abysses. But those who have survived war know better. Fate is not thread. It is rib bone locked in ice. It is a splinter of winter under the heel. It can turn upward without warning and bury itself in a heart before a man even has time to swear. This is the story of a man who died and came back. If that were all, he would have been no different from the old heroes of northern legend, dragged back from death to finish a curse or settle an unpaid debt. But Eirik Ashborn did not return as a blessing. He returned as a crack in the order of things. His death on the scaffold did not close a tragedy. It opened a fissure backward through time, touched the roots of the world tree, and woke things that ought to have slept much longer. Gods who knew how to look far began to turn their heads. Kings began remembering branches of history in which they had already lost. Witches who once burned in holy fire realized their ashes had never truly cooled. And in the middle of it all, a small snow-covered village became the place where destiny decided to test, one more time, how fiercely human beings could love before that very love tore disaster wide open. In the old tales, Odin gave up an eye in exchange for wisdom, yet almost no one speaks of what it costs to see too much. Once a person has stared into enough possible futures, he can no longer live like an ordinary man. He begins to love like one who already knows loss by name. He begins to rage like one who has seen betrayal before it arrives. He steps into battle knowing that every word, every touch, every glance over a shoulder may have happened somewhere else already, and that this time, if even one heartbeat falls out of rhythm, the whole world may tilt into a different ruin. This tale is written like a prayer spoken into a storm. It lingers where the heart must tremble. It becomes merciless where fate itself shows no pity. Behind every victory it leaves the shadow of a price still unpaid. You will find witches here, and systems woven out of roots and runes, and bloodlines split to make living locks, and doors that should never open, and gods too old to be innocent. Above all, you will find men and women forced to choose which part of themselves they mean to keep when both light and darkness arrive to claim ownership. Remember only one thing before you step into these pages. The North forgives no one who walks through a blizzard and still hopes to keep his hands clean of blood. Fate does not forgive either. Chapter 1. The Dead Man Who Woke in Black Snow. There was no moon over Scholdheim on the night of the execution. The sky hung above the city like a strip of smoked hide, heavy and low, so low that Eirik had the absurd feeling that if he reached up with both hands he could rip it open and reveal an even deeper darkness waiting behind it. Snow fell, but it was no longer white. Every crystal shone with a gray-black sheen, like ash from temples burned centuries earlier, still drifting stubbornly through the northern wind, before settling upon his shoulders, his hair, his face, as if judgment itself had arrived late and was making up for the delay. The scaffold stood in the middle of the square, fresh oak, sturdy beams, pale wood. They had prepared his death carefully, almost lovingly, like priests arranging an altar for a sacrifice meant to be remembered. Rune-etched chains bound his wrists, cold enough to bite through flesh and straight into bone. The branding mark burned across his chest, still smoked. The stench of seared skin mixed with torch resin, wet wool, and the human smell of fear from the crowd pressed beneath him. They looked at him as men look at monsters. Traitor, heretic, mad white wolf, caller of things that should not be named. Of those titles, only some were untrue. Eirik found that bitterly amusing. Truth, as always, had been the first thing murdered. On the highest stone tier of the square stood King Haldor in white fur, calm-faced and immaculate, as if he had come not to watch a son die, but to officiate a winter ritual. To his left stood High Priestess Sigrun, all angles and cold glass eyes. To his right stood Brynja, captain of the Frost Knights, the woman who had crossed fields of corpses beside him, tied his wounds shut with the leather from her own vambrace, and once told him that whatever else the world took from them, at least at the end they would still have each other. She would not look at him. That hurt worse than the axe suspended above his head. Sigrun stepped forward. Her voice rolled through the square, magnified by holy magic, until it sounded like stone bells ringing in a cavern. Eirik of Ashen Vale, you are condemned for consorting with abyssal witches, stealing a relic of Odin, violating the boundary between life and death, and conspiring to open the northern gate. The crowd roared. Some threw mud, some threw ash, some hurled curses they never would have dared think while he was still the youngest victorious commander in the kingdom, fresh from war and wrapped in banners. Eirik raised his head. Dry blood cracked at the corner of his mouth. He smiled, not warmly, not bravely, but with the hard, humorless cruelty of a man who had finally lost the last thing worth pretending for. You need a monster so you can forget the real monster is the one sitting on the throne. Something thin as a knife edge crossed Haldor's eye. Then the king's calm settled back into place. Sigrun asked, "Do you have any final words?" Eirik looked out across the square. These were the same faces that had once shouted his name under battle standards, pressed infants into his arms for luck before summer voyages, called him the White Wolf of the North, and sworn he had been chosen by the gods. Now those same mouths wanted only to see his head fall. "Yes," he said. He lifted his gaze to the moonless sky. "If the gods still keep their eyes open, remember this night, when the roots of the world tree bleed, when the ravens fly backward to their nest, when the sea swallows the sun, and the blood of the dead is called by name, I will return, and next time I will burn not only the heavens, but the thrones of men as well." For one heartbeat, the square was silent. Then Sigrun lowered her hand. The axe fell. In that final instant, Eirik did not look at the king. He looked at Brynja, and just as steel touched skin, she lifted her head. There was no hatred in her eyes, only horror. The world shattered into light, blood, black snow, and the sound of timber splitting. When Eirik opened his eyes again, the smell of blood was gone. In its place were dry straw, pine resin, and herbal broth simmering over a low hearth. He lurched upright and clutched at his throat. No wound, no blood, no scaffold, no torches, no crowd. Before him stood a narrow wooden room with an old low ceiling, an oak-handled axe against the corner, a pale bearskin spread near the fire.
A girl with red hair held a bowl of water in both hands and stared at him with wide, terrified eyes.
Freya, his foster sister, the girl who, in the old line of time, had died 3 years before he ever stood on the scaffold. The bowl slipped from her hands and shattered against the floor. "Eirik," she whispered, "by the gods, you're awake?" He could not breathe. She rushed to him. She was warm, her heart hammered against him, her hair smelled of hay smoke and dried berries. No dream had any right to feel so completely real. "You had a fever for 3 days," she said, hands shaking where they gripped his shoulders. "I thought you were going to die." 3 days. Fever. Ashen veil. He turned and caught sight of himself in the dull bronze mirror beside the hearth. The face staring back was 17, lean, sharp-cheeked, untouched by battle scars, eyes still too young, even with fear in them. He stumbled backward. "What day is it?" he asked. Freya blinked. "What?" "What day, month, year on the frost calendar?" "It's the 13th day of Wolf Moon, year 973 after the Raven Compact." His fingers dug into the edge of the table. 4 years before his execution, 1 week before the witch hunters descended on Ashen Vale, 3 months before he first discovered the magic in his own blood, a year before he ever entered the machinery of court and war. He had come back. At that exact thought, a whisper colder than any winter breathed through his mind. Yggdrasil Legacy System, initializing. Eirik froze. A pale blue panel unfolded before his eyes, like mist cut into shapes by invisible runes. Host confirmed, Eirik Ashborn. Status, deceased once. Rebirth privilege, granted. Fate branch access. First objective, survive the night of the Fire Church. Reward, root magic, unlock. Failure, death. A system. He had heard of such things only in old skald songs and madmen's confessions, voices from beneath the world tree, contracts woven into souls, gifts that were half mechanism and half curse. He had never expected one to speak with his name in its mouth. Freya was still staring at him, frightened not only by the fever, but by whatever she saw in his face. "Eirik, you're scaring me." He dragged in a breath and forced his mind to steady. If this was real, then he had 1 week to save the village, 1 week to prevent the first massacre, 1 week to keep Freya alive. "Listen to me," he said, gripping her wrist. "For the next few days, you do exactly as I say. Do not leave the village after sunset. If strangers come asking about the stone well in the east field, you tell them you know nothing. And if Torstein calls a gathering after dark, you stay inside no matter what anyone says." She stared. "Why?" "Because fear will keep you alive." Freya swallowed, then nodded, though she clearly understood none of it. A bell began ringing outside, 3 slow blows from the village center. Eirik went cold. In his memory, that meeting was supposed to happen 2 days later. The system flared red. Timeline deviation detected. Another returner has intervened. He felt the chill move all the way through him. He was not the only one who had come back, and whoever the other returner was had already moved before him. Ashen Vale's square was crowded by torchlight. Fire painted the wooden houses in unnatural shades of orange and gold, while the wind dragged sparks through the dusk. Elder Torstein stood on a broad stone and shouted over the murmur of frightened villagers. "The seal at the east well has been broken. The runes are shattered." The crowd erupted. Eirik stood near the edge, hood low, heart pounding. In the old line of time, the stone well contained the first eye of Norn he had ever touched, a fragment capable of revealing branches of fate. He had discovered it only after the massacre. It was one of the reasons the court eventually noticed him. Now the seal had been broken early. Someone else was hunting the eye. A voice soft as breath touched his ear. "You see it too, don't you?"
He spun. A girl stood behind him in a gray cloak dusted with snow. Her hair was almost white in the firelight. Her face was sharp, beautiful, and cold as if it had been carved from moonlit ice. Her eyes were a dark glacial blue, unlike any ordinary northerners. Noelle, the wandering witch who in his original future would be burned alive in Varnheim 2 years later, and she had never once set foot in Ashen Vale. "Who are you?" he asked, though he knew. She smiled without warmth. One who found out once wasn't enough. He understood at once. She had returned too. "Then there are 3 of us," he said. "3?" she repeated. "You, me, and the one who broke the seal." Her smile vanished. She looked toward the well, where the wind had begun to circle strangely over the snow. "No, possibly more." The ground shuddered. A low, booming sound came from beneath the village, like something enormous knocking from the far side of the world. A scream split the square. Shadows lengthened across the snow, then twisted and rose up on their own. One villager's shadow tore free, expanded into the shape of a giant eyeless raven, and bit through his throat before anyone understood what they were seeing. Chaos exploded. The night of the fire church started early, Eirik snapped. Objective updated. Protect 30 villagers from shade hounds. Progress 0 of 30.
Noelle drew a bone knife etched in blue-black sigils and drove it into the snow. A ring of death magic rippled outward. "Do you know what these are?" Eirik nodded. "Shade hounds. They should not exist yet." "Then you really did see the future," she murmured. "And you, unfortunately." Another shadow beast lunged straight toward Freya. Eirik moved before the thought finished. He seized a spear from a villager and rammed it through the thing, but the weapon passed through smoke-dark flesh without resistance. The hound shrieked, a sound like metal needles scraping the inside of his skull. Steel could not kill them. Freya stumbled backward, face white. "Eirik!" The beast sprang. The system burst into light. Trigger condition met. Root magic unlocked. Blood runes. Pain split his palm open. Red sigils burned beneath the skin, as if live coals had been poured into his veins. Instinct older than memory surged through him. He raised his hand. Blood flew into the air and shaped itself into a single blazing rune. Isa. Ice. The shade hound froze in mid-leap and shattered into black glass across the square. For one impossible second, everything stopped. Freya stared at him as though the brother she knew had torn open and something older had looked out through his face. Noelle did not look surprised at all. "So," she said very quietly, "you carry the blood of the World Tree." Eirik turned. "And what do you carry?" She pushed back her sleeve just enough for him to see the mark burned over her pale wrist, a black symbol like a stitched-shut eye, the mark of hell. Before he could speak, the ground beneath the east well ruptured. A column of purple-black light shot into the sky, dragging snow and ash into a roaring spiral. From inside that light, a human hand emerged. It wore the silver raven signet of the crown. Then a man climbed out of the well. He wore black armor streaked with frost and old blood. His face was gaunter, harsher, more scarred than Eirik's, but not different enough to be mistaken. It was himself, or not himself exactly. It was Eirik 10 years older, a version forged by wars this Eirik had not yet lived, with eyes like dead coals, and a sword at his side made from a dragon's white bone. The man smiled. "At last," he said, "I found you." That was the cruelest twist of all. The one who had broken the seal, the one who had returned, the one hunting the Eye of Norn, was Eirik, a future version that had survived the scaffold, a version that had not come back to save anyone, a version that had come back to finish the end of the world.
Interlude 1. Dream of Ravens. That night, if night was even the right word for the black, sleepless interval between one disaster and the next. Eirik dreamed without ever fully losing consciousness. He stood in a field of snow where the drifts were feathered black and ravens walked in circles around him rather than flying. Their feet left writing in the frost. One line, then another, then 1,000 overlapping trails that no human eye could follow. Above them all hung a tree too large to fit into the sky. Its roots rose where roots should have descended. Its branches vanished into a lightless sea overhead. Something hung from the highest visible limb, a body, or perhaps many bodies, seen from too far away to count with certainty. The ravens did not look up. They kept writing. A woman's voice spoke from the dark among the trunks. "You are late again." He turned. No one stood there. He looked back, and the ravens had arranged themselves into the shape of an eye. From its pupil rose a girl with red hair, barefoot and white-clad, though her dress was threaded all through with moving runes like blood trying to learn how to become writing. Freya. Or something standing where Freya ought to have been. "Was it always me?" he asked her. She smiled with unbearable sadness. "No," she said. "That is what makes it worse." A second figure stepped out behind her, silver-haired beneath a great hood, one hand dark to the wrist with funeral ink. Noelle did not look at him. She looked at the tree. "The root remembers every branch that was cut," she said. "And the branches?" Eirik asked. Noelle's gaze remained fixed upward. "The branches remember the roots that betrayed them." Wind blew across the snow. The ravens shivered and rose all at once, but instead of taking to the sky, they flew backward, as if time had reversed only for them. They vanished into the tree. Then Brynja stood where the birds had been, armor rimed with ice, face bloodless, a wound through her chest. "Do not believe the first future that loves you," she said. He tried to step toward her. The snow beneath his feet became a lake of black water. Beneath its surface were faces, villagers, soldiers, priests, kings, eyes open, mouths moving soundlessly, as if speech itself had drowned. Then another man rose from the lake, the older Eirik, the discarded shadow. He climbed up, made of all the reflections beneath the water, and looked at him not with hatred, but with pity. "I am what survives when you keep choosing them," he said. The dream broke when a raven landed on Eirik's shoulder and spoke in the voice of a king. "This time, I will not make the same mistake." He woke with both hands locked around the dagger beside his bed and the taste of smoke in his mouth.
Chapter 2. The One Who Stepped Out of the Well of Fate. If terror had a body, Eirik thought, it would feel exactly like standing face to face with yourself and seeing that the world had managed to carve away every human softness you once possessed. The older Eirik stepped fully out of the broken well, each footfall burning a violet mark into the snow. Shadehounds that had moments before attacked villagers now slunk back from him like beaten dogs. He looked around the ruined square with the detached boredom of a man revisiting a battlefield he had outlived too many times. "How weak," he said. "I had almost forgotten." Freya clutched at Eirik's sleeve. "Who is he?" Eirik did not answer. He did not know how. The face before him was his, but sharpened by wars and losses he had not yet earned. The black-armored stranger's gaze slid over him and hardened. "I am the answer," the man said. "I am what you become after learning that saving people only teaches them where to place the knife." Noelle, breathing hard from the spell she had cast, gave a faint laugh. "You make a dreadful first impression." He flicked his eyes toward her. The air around Noelle flash froze and burst. She slammed backward into a wall hard enough to spit blood. Eirik surged forward, blood runes burning down his arm. Isa, Thurisaz, Awaz. He threw a chain of ice, destruction, and root force at the older man.
the spell shattered on one lifted finger. "You still haven't learned to braid them properly," the older Eirik said, disappointing. Then he vanished. The blow to Eric's stomach drove the air from his lungs and sent him tumbling across the snow. Before he could recover, the white dragonbone sword rested at his throat. "I did not come back to kill you immediately. I came back to make sure you understand. Every road leads to me. Every attempt at salvation breeds something worse." Eirik bared his teeth. "If you're me, then you know I hate lectures." "So do I." The blade pressed just hard enough to promise blood. Then the man leaned in close and whispered, "Freya dies. Brynja betrays. Halldor offers you up. And Odin was never on your side." There was too much truth in those words to dismiss. It was not a taunt, it was memory. Before the blade could move again, chains of black-gray magic lashed down from above. Noelle had forced herself upright and opened a slit of Hell's power with both hands. The shadow chains wrapped the older Eric's sword arm and throat, hissing where they touched his armor. "Get away from him," she said. The older man actually looked amused. "A daughter of Hell? You don't meet many people who recognize quality when they see it." She yanked. The chains held him for a second, but a second was enough. Eirik rolled aside, slammed his bleeding palm into the snow, and raised a shield rune between them. Algis. The ward flared, antler-shaped and bright. The older Eirik cut through Noelle's chains and stepped back onto the lip of the broken well. The purple-black pillar within it pulsed. Around the stone ring, old carved symbols that should have remained dormant began to blaze, not the signs of a seal, but of an unlocking. Eirik understood in one terrible instant. The Eye of Norn had become a key. This version of him had not returned merely to claim it. He had returned to graft it onto the roots of the world. "If he takes control of that eye in this state," Eirik shouted, "he won't just see the future, he'll be able to rewrite it." Noelle's eyes narrowed. "Then stop talking and move." She leapt to the roof of a nearby house, cloak streaming. Both her hands opened, palms outward. A vast gray aperture tore open in the air above the square. From it descended pale hands by the dozens, then hundreds, reaching like the roots of dead things eager for warmth. The older Eric's expression sharpened for the first time. "You dare open Hell's threshold here?" Noelle smiled with blood on her teeth. "You dare touch the world tree. Let's not pretend either of us came dressed in innocence." The dead hands seized his limbs and shadow, pinning him for one precious moment. Eirik ran. He did not run on snow. He ran on the black roots already emerging around the well. Rido blazed beneath each step. Wind tore at his face. The Eye of Norn floated within the purple column above the well, a crystal shaped like an eye, cracked all through, and within every fracture scenes of war, fire, ravens, a golden temple collapsing, a child weeping beneath colossal roots. The eye was broken, or worse, unbound. He reached for it. Another hand reached at the same time. The older Eirik had broken free. Their fingers touched the crystal together. The world went white.
When Eirik could see again, he stood on a mist-covered plain beneath a tree so immense that mountains would have looked like moss at its roots. Its branches held stars, its roots pierced horizons. Upon one low bough sat a woman in black, barefoot, hair hanging like a waterfall into the mist. 3 masks hung from her belt, one weeping, one laughing, one blank. Norn. Not one woman, but the overlapping presence of all 3 fates wearing one shape. "At last," she said, her voice coming from every direction at once, "2 children touching my eye at the same time."
The older Eirik stood 10 paces away, one hand on his sword. "Be quick," he said flatly. "I have no patience for divine theatrics." Norn laughed. "You never did." She looked at Eirik. "And you, what do you seek?" "A chance to make things right," he said. Her expression softened with pity so ancient it became cruel. "That is always the loveliest answer," she said, "and the stupidest." With one motion, she summoned a sheet of water before them. It showed the execution, only not as Eirik remembered it. In the water, just as the axe fell, Brynja lunged from the king's side and took the stroke meant for him. Blood splashed over his face. Haldor rose. Sigrun screamed. The square broke into chaos. Eirik felt the ground tilt. "Your memory is not false," she said. "It is merely incomplete. True in one branch, absent in another." The image changed, a field of corpses under a dead sun. The older Eirik kneeling with Freya's body in his arms, smiling as if grief had finally rotted into madness. Another image, Brynja wearing a black raven crown, Noel upon a throne of bones in Helheim, Haldor hanging from a withered branch, Odin bleeding from one eye while the world tree burned from its roots upward. Possibility after possibility. There is no single line, only those cruel enough to force the world into one. The older Eirik smiled. "Then I am right." "In one respect," she replied, "only one of you leaves with a master claim." The air thickened into the shape of a battlefield. "Kill each other," she said lazily. The older Eirik moved first. His sword hissed for Eirik's throat. Eirik raised runes to block, and the collision broke circles in the mist underfoot like stones thrown into a lake. He was weaker. Of course he was weaker. The body he wore was 17. His enemy knew every habit he had, because those habits belonged to him as well. The first blow he stopped, the second cut his shoulder, the third changed angle at the last instant, using a feint Eirik himself favored. He blocked late and bled anyway. "You cannot defeat yourself," the older man said. Eirik answered with a knee to the ribs and a rune chain cast properly for the first time. Kenaz, Isa, Hagalaz, flame of revelation, ice, hail. A storm of fire frost burst between them. The older Eirik slid back, breastplate cracked and laughed, a real laugh this time. "Better," he said. "No," Eirik answered, "I'm remembering." The system flashed in the white air. Sealed memory, 17% released. Images tore into him. A dark chamber, Freya kneeling within a blood circle, a sacrificial knife in her hand. Brynja saying, "Some deaths are keys." Freya again, but older, eyes no longer human. "You raised me, but I am the lock." He staggered. The older Eirik struck, not at him, but at the water mirror behind them. It shattered. 1,000 futures burst into fragments. Norn stood all at once, and for the first time something like concern crossed her impossible face. "What did you do?" The older Eirik turned toward her with a smile sharpened by exhaustion and contempt. "I do not need to beat him," he said. "I only need him not to remember too soon." The broken mirror split the white plane with fissures. Space itself began to collapse. A force seized Eirik and dragged him backward. Before he vanished, the older man gave him one final look. "This time," he said, "I will let you live long enough to watch Freya open the gate with your own hands on the key." At that instant, Norn flicked 2 fingers. Something needle-small and crystalline buried itself beneath the skin of Eirik's palm. "I dislike certainty," she said, "so I will cheat." He fell. He slammed back into the village square, gasping, half in snow, half in blood. The purple light was gone. The roots were sinking. The older Eirik had vanished. Noelle knelt beside him, hand locked in his collar. "You are alive," she said. "Wonderful. Explain." Freya fell on him and wrapped both arms around him as though she could keep him from disappearing by force. He opened his palm. Beneath the torn skin glowed a crystal shard no larger than a nail file. Master claim failed. Exceptional item acquired. Norn shard. Effect: reveals one major lie per day. Warning: be wary of those who share your blood.
He looked up. The system's pale letters appeared above Freya's shoulder. The major lie for today has been identified. Then the words burned red. I know nothing about the stone well. She had said that to him only hours earlier, and the shard confirmed it. The most terrible twist of that night was not the older self emerging from the future. It was the girl he had come back to save. Freya had lied, and perhaps she knew far more than either of them could survive. Interlude 2. Ice beneath the armor. Brynja rode through the thinning dark before dawn with her jaw locked hard enough to ache. She had been dispatched to Ashen Vale under the authority of the Frost Order, ostensibly to investigate a magical disturbance. Yet from the moment the order came down from the capital, she had known there was something wrong in the way it had been phrased. Not urgent, but quiet. Not public, but immediate, as if those who sent her wanted witnesses only up to a point. She had slept badly for 3 nights. Each dream was the same in structure and different in detail. A scaffold, black snow, a man bound in rune chains. Sometimes she stood beside the king. Sometimes she stood at the foot of the platform. Once, to her horror, she stood on the scaffold itself, hands red to the elbows. She never saw the condemned man's full face. She only knew that when the axe fell, some part of her woke up inside the dream before the rest of her followed. On the road north, she had told no one. A captain of the Frost Order does not confess to prophetic nightmares unless she wants priests asking questions they do not deserve to hear. Yet as the village bell rang in the distance and she first caught sight of the ruined square, she knew with a certainty so sharp it might as well have been memory that she had already stood here somehow. Not in this life, perhaps, not in any sensible chronology. But her body knew the angle of that burned roofline, the slope of the snow where blood would pool, the emptiness at the center of the air. Then she saw him, the young man in the square, tall, hard-featured even in youth, with eyes that looked as though they had already watched too many people die. The instant her gaze fell on him, something in her chest closed around a wound she did not remember receiving. I have seen you die, she thought. It frightened her more than the magic. He looked back at her not like a villager looking at a knight, nor like a criminal looking at possible execution. He looked at her as if he were measuring the space between betrayal and forgiveness, and had not yet decided which one she belonged to. Brynja hated uncertainty. She hated even more the strange ache of relief that had risen in her when she realized he was still alive. By the time she dismounted, she knew 2 things with perfect clarity. First, that the village disturbance had already outgrown the authority of any local order. Second, that the young man named Eirik is what her dreams had been circling. Then her life had already been tied to his by some thread she had not agreed to. She did not yet know whether that thread ended in love, death, or treason, only that the ice beneath her armor had begun to crack.
Chapter 3. The White Witch and the Lie Beneath the Ash Roof. Ashen Vale did not sleep for the rest of the night. The smell of charred timber, blood, and hot resin settled over the village like a second roof. Children cried. Women called names into the dark. Men hammered splintered beams back into place with hands that shook from exhaustion more than cold. In the old line of time, there would have been no rebuilding. There would have been no one left to rebuild. Saving even part of the village should have felt like victory. It did not. Eirik sat alone in the woodshed behind his home, back against rough planks, staring at the lamp flame. The Norn shard beneath his skin pulsed softly whenever his thoughts strayed toward Freya. She had lied, not about some childish thing, a major lie, a hidden truth tied to blood and fate. The door creaked. Noel entered without invitation, carrying 2 wooden cups that steamed with bitter herbs. "Drink," she said, setting one beside him. "It is not poison. If I wanted you dead, I would choose a method less wasteful." He took the cup but did not drink. "I have not decided whether to trust you." "Good," she said. "People who trust me too quickly rarely live long." In the firelight, her pale hair looked silver blue. There was blood dried at the corner of her mouth from the battle by the well, and the fresh bandage at her ribs had already spotted through. Yet she still carried herself with the impossible arrogance of someone who had stared long enough into death that ordinary fear bored her. "What do you know?" Eirik asked. "About what? About me? About the version that came from the future? About Freya?" Noel leaned one shoulder against a beam and thought a moment. "About you, less than you think. About the future version, enough to hate him. About Freya," she paused, "more than I would like." His grip tightened on the cup. "Then say it." "No." His temper flashed. "You pull me out of death and then give me half a sentence?" "I pulled you out because if you die now, the North slides into a branch I have no interest in watching again." Her tone sharpened. "Do not flatter yourself." "Then tell me." She shook her head. "If I tell you everything tonight, you either kill your sister in panic or die trying to protect her blindly. Both outcomes help the other you." "What am I supposed to do? Pretend nothing happened?" "No." She flicked her fingers. 3 small runes appeared in the air between them. An eye, a knife, and a door. You observe. You cut. You wait. Not everything hidden should be dragged screaming into daylight the instant you smell blood. Eirik gave a humorless laugh. "You sound like an old crone from a burial mound." "My teacher was old enough before I buried her." That answer was so calm it almost made him smile. "What is Freya?" Eirik asked. Noel looked down into her cup. The wind hissed through the walls. "Freya is Freya, at least for now." The Norn shard did not react. Not a lie. Before he could press further, the woodshed door banged open, and Freya rushed in, cheeks flushed from running. "Eirik, Thorstein wants you. Riders have come from the city." The Norn shard burned. No words appeared, meaning the day's lie had already been spent. That somehow made the next uncertainty worse. In the square, 5 white horses stood in a line under the paling sky. Their riders wore the blue-gray cloaks of the Frost Order. At their head stood a woman perhaps 30 years old, fair-haired, beautiful in a hard northern way, and colder than most drawn blades. Brynja. In the old future, Eirik had met her more than a year after leaving Ashen Vale. In this one, she had arrived now. For a single absurd heartbeat, everything inside him went still. The memory of her laughter by firelight, the pressure of her hands against a wound, the last look on the scaffold, all of it struck at once. Brynja dismounted and surveyed the square with a soldier's precision. Broken roofs, residual magic, villagers hiding fear behind labor. Then her gaze came to him. She frowned, as though she too felt some thread jerk tight. "I am Brynja Sigurdsdottir, captain of the Frost Order detachment assigned to investigate the magical rupture in Ashen Vale. I need to speak with the first person who made direct contact with the anomaly." Thorstein pointed to Eirik instantly. Noelle stood half hidden at the crowd's edge, under her hood, watching. Freya was silent at his side. Brynja walked straight toward him. 3 steps away, she stopped. "Do I know you?" she asked. Eirik kept his face unreadable. No. The shard did not mark it as a lie. In this timeline, they truly had not met. Yet her sense of recognition was real. Brynja was remembering something. Perhaps fragments, but enough to be dangerous. "That is strange," she murmured. "I could swear I have seen you die." The villagers nearest them made warding signs in the air. Eirik answered, "Is that how the Frost Order usually opens an investigation, by telling a witness he looks like a corpse?" A corner of her mouth moved. "Only when he has the eyes of a man who has already seen the axe descend." She drew him into the meeting hall and shut the door behind them. Noelle slipped in moments later, despite the guards, which somehow did not surprise either of them.
Brynja removed her gloves and set a raven medallion upon the table. "For 3 nights," she said, "I have dreamed the same square, a scaffold, a condemned man. I never saw his full face, until I entered this village." She looked up. "Tell me the truth. If you lie, I take you to the Frost Abbey in chains." "If I tell the truth," he asked, "then I decide whether to protect you or kill you." So direct, so completely Brynja. He took the only path left open to him. "Have you ever heard of the dead returning?" he asked. "In stories? Then treat me like a story that went bad." She studied him in silence. Then she asked the question that cut deepest. "In that dream of mine, did I betray you?" He almost laughed from the pain of it. He did not know whether to hate her, forgive her, or hate fate for making him consider both. "I'm not sure," he said. Truth enough. Her shoulders eased by a fraction. "Good," she said quietly, "because I am not sure whether I saved you or killed you." The door burst open. One of her knights rushed in, carrying a scorched wooden box. "We found this in the abandoned house to the east." Inside lay a doll made of birch twigs, its eyes and mouth sewn shut with red thread. On its chest sat one dark drop of dried blood. Bloodline magic. Noelle's expression changed at once. "Do not touch it." Too late. Brynja's fingertips had already brushed the doll's shoulder. Black magic detonated through the room. Windows slammed shut. The air grew heavy and wrong. From the stitched mouth of the doll came a child's voice, sweet enough to turn the blood cold. "Brother, you finally opened my gift." Freya's voice. Eirik felt his pulse stop. Brynja turned sharply toward him. Noelle cursed in a dead language. The doll began to crack, black fluid seeping through the splits. Freya's voice giggled once. "Don't look for me, Eirik. If you open that door before the moon is full, I won't be me anymore." Then the voice changed. Older, deeper, vast, with something that had worn too many names. "But if you do not open it, I will come through." The doll burst into ash. On the tabletop, left behind in blood, was a sigil. "The door is locked by Ashborn blood." Brynja's gaze hardened. "Who is Freya?" Eirik's answer came out as a whisper. "Perhaps my sister is not only my sister." Noelle shut her eyes for one heartbeat, as if the worst possibility she had feared had finally become unavoidable. "No," she said, "it is worse than that." She placed an old green-black coin upon the table, stamped with the image of roots wrapped around a split eye. "You are not the only one carrying Ashborn blood." Eirik stared. "You were never some lost child, kindly adopted after a storm. You were hidden. And your father," she added, "was the last man entrusted with the true key to the door." Interlude 3. What Noelle did not say. Noelle had not meant to care.
That was the simplest version of the truth, and, because of that simplicity, the one she distrusted the most. In the branch of time she remembered best, Ashenvale had burned too quickly for anyone to save. Eirik had arrived too late to pull Freya from the altar, too late to stop the king's hunters, too late even to hate himself properly before the machinery of the kingdom swallowed him. Noel watched that branch from the margins, first as an observer, then as an ally, then as a witness unable to forget the sound a soul makes when it chooses fury over grief, because fury hurts less. She knew what the other Eirik was. Not his exact origin, perhaps, not until later, but she knew the smell of a person who had survived too many versions of his own ending. She had seen it in shades and revenants, in witch queens, in priests who learned to pray to emptiness because actual gods had ceased answering. The black-armored Eirik carried that smell inside his bones. The younger one, this one, still had choices. That was what made him dangerous. A man who believes he can save what he loves will bargain with horrors more eagerly than one who has already surrendered. Noel knew this because she had done it herself. Hell's power came to her not through inheritance alone. It came through the oldest exchange in any world. Grief offered upward, something terrible offered back. She did not tell Eirik that the first time she saw Freya in any branch, the girl had been standing inside a circle of open-eyed corpses when snow fell upward into a dark split sky. She had not told him that Hell herself, amused in the way only the dead can be amused, once called Freya the Hinge Girl. She had not told him, in the worst branch she remembered, Eirik had begged Noel to kill him before he reached the door, and she had failed. So she kept truths to herself. Not out of kindness, she did not flatter herself with that word. She kept them because timing was a blade, and truth released too early could cut deeper than lies. Still, when she watched him look at Freya with that old, helpless devotion, something inside Noel tightened. Pity, perhaps, or memory, or maybe simply the irritation of seeing a disaster approach in such human clothing. She did not believe in happy endings, but she had begun, against all reason, to want this branch, to earn one anyway.
Chapter 4. The Hidden Blood and the Church of the One-Eyed God. They left Ashenvale before the sun had fully risen. Freya did not come with them. That decision hurt Eirik more than any wound he had taken so far, yet he no longer trusted his ability to keep her safe if he kept her close, nor did he trust leaving her unwatched. In the end, he placed her in the care of old Astrid the healer, and forbade her to go near the east fields or the forest edge until he returned. What unnerved him most was that Freya did not argue. She only looked at him for a long time, as if memorizing his face for another use. The northern forest opened before them like a black wall. Pines stood so dense their branches strangled light. Snow in the deep woods reflected blue instead of white. The wind moved through the needles with the hush of 1,000 unseen mouths. Brynja rode ahead on her white mare, her cloak a slash of frost against the dark trunks. Noel moved on foot and somehow kept pace with the horse without seeming to hurry. Eirik followed between them, the Ashborn coin warm in his palm, its hidden line of light angling deeper north. "What is the Church of the One-Eyed God?" Brynja asked after a long silence. "Older than your order," Eirik answered. "Older than the crown in its current form. Not a public temple, more a hidden archive of what Odin's priests were never meant to destroy. The kind of place where men gouged out eyes in exchange for one more step of sight," Noel said. "You say that like you considered it," Brynja muttered. "I like both of mine. They are useful." By midday the forest changed.
Birdsong vanished first, then the signs of deer and fox. Even the wind seemed redirected by some invisible lattice. Marks began appearing on tree bark, ancient carvings nearly swallowed by resin and age. Every one of them was an eye facing north. Brynja slowed. Forbidden ground. Noel crouched and released a handful of snow. Instead of dropping straight, the flakes drifted sharply sideways. "Bent path warding," she said. "Anyone without a key walks in circles until the cold finishes the work." Eirik looked at the coin. Then someone expected visitors. "Someone," Noel said, "or something that used to be." The church revealed itself all at once. After one final bend in the path, the trees opened into a clearing too perfectly round to be natural. At its center stood a stone structure, black-gray and ancient, smaller than the grand churches of the modern order, but older by centuries. Moss froze upon the roof. The oak doors were carved with ravens, wolves, and a single staring eye at the brow. No holy ice cross, no bells, none of the symbols of the faith Brynja served. Only silence, and the pressure of being watched. The coin in Eirik's hand vibrated. The doors groaned open. Cold rolled out, not the cold of weather, but the cold of depth, like air from a cavern below the sea. Inside there were no pews, no altar in the new style. Instead, a circular hall opened beneath a domed ceiling, every stone etched with runes so old they made Eirik's eyes ache. At the center lay a pool of black water shaped like an eye. At the far wall rose a seated statue of Odin, one eye hollowed out, hands resting not in blessing, but upon the heads of two iron ravens. There was nothing noble in its face. It looked instead exhausted and dangerous, like a god grown old from seeing too much. When Eirik stepped closer, the black water trembled. "Blood returns," said a voice like dry wood breaking. An old man emerged from behind the statue. Or perhaps old was too weak a word. He looked almost mummified, skin clinging to bone, one eye white and dead, the other engraved with a rotating rune carved directly around the flesh. His hair and beard had been braided with raven feathers. Around his wrist hung a rosary of child-sized finger bones. Brynja drew her sword instantly. Noel's hand went to her knife. The old man ignored them and fixed his gaze on Eirik. "Son of the last ash," he said. "Who are you?" Eirik asked. "The keeper of what your line hid," the old man answered, "and the one who has waited 17 years for you to walk through that door." Noel muttered, "I hate that sentence every time I hear it." The old man held out a withered hand. The token. Eirik gave him the coin. The man pressed it against his blind eye. It dissolved into luminous dust. The runes on the walls blazed awake. The black pool at the center of the room began to spiral. "You want to know why you were hidden," the keeper said. "You want to know what Freya is. You want to know why the future hunts you. Good." He pointed at the water. Images formed. A blizzard 17 years earlier, a man running through a burning estate with an infant wrapped in fur, a dark-haired woman behind him, bleeding from the side, carrying a baby girl. The man's face was older, fiercer, but close enough to Eirik's that denial died before it rose. Leif Ashborn, his father. Leif Ashborn, last guardian of the true key to the door of emptiness.
In the vision, Leif placed the infant boy into the arms of a village couple, Eirik's foster parents. He gave them a coin bearing the same symbol they had just dissolved. The dark-haired woman hesitated with the baby girl. Then a storm of ravens descended. She turned. A shining ice arrow punched through her chest. Brynja flinched. Even she recognized the mark of old church military craft. Eirik roared. He handed off the boy and turned back. The vision blurred in snow and fire. When it cleared, the girl was gone. "Freya," Eirik whispered. "No," said the keeper. "Her first name was Eirik Ashborn." He let that settle before adding, "You are siblings, but not in the ordinary sense." Brynja frowned. "Explain." "One child born of flesh, one child completed by ritual." The old man's dead eye reflected the pool. "Your mother, Solveig, was the last high-blood priestess of the Ashborn line. When the door began to strain, she divided the key in her own womb. One half took the shape of an heir, the other took the shape of a living lock." Eirik heard the system flare red. Core information confirmed. Primary objective updated. Prevent the union of Ashborn blood. Failure equals opening of the empty door. "You mean," he said, throat dry, "my sister is a lock?" "The lock," said the keeper. "The door itself lies elsewhere, but only when the two blood halves are joined can what waits beyond it come through." Brynja looked sick. "If the Order learns this—" "They will not kill you quickly," Noel said before the keeper could answer. "They will try to use you first." Brynja's jaw hardened. "You do not know my order." The keeper turned his rune-cut eye toward her. "I know it better than you think, Brynja Sigurdsdottir. Your mother is the one who once gave the Frost Abbey a map to this church." She went white. "You lie!" The Norn shard in Eirik's hand heated, but did not mark the words false. "My mother died when I was 8. "No," said the keeper. "She was renamed and hidden in an ice convent. She died 3 years ago." The blow of that truth landed visibly. Brynja took half a step back. It was the same kind of violence Freya's lie had done to Eirik, the destruction not of a person, but of an old certainty. The keeper reached into the black pool and withdrew a small stone box. "This is for you," he said, placing it in Eirik's hands, "the blind testament, half of what Leif left behind." "And the other half?" Eirik asked. The old man smiled with blackened teeth. "In the memories sealed inside you." Eirik stared. "Your father knew someone would come backward through the branches of time to hunt both children," said the keeper. "So he used the roots of Yggdrasil to build a shell around your soul. Your system is not entirely a gift of the tree. It is partly your father's design." Eirik's pulse pounded. "The older version of me, he has one too." "Had, not whole." The keeper's gaze sharpened. "That is why he warped. Part of him was severed and raised elsewhere." Noel's eyes flashed. "So that's it. His system was damaged or stripped of the branch that kept him human." The keeper nodded slightly. "Well reasoned, Hell's daughter." Brynja found her voice again. "If all of this is true, why was Ashen Vale targeted first?" "Because one of you stirred too early." "Freya?" Eirik asked. "No," the keeper said. "You." The answer struck harder than expected. "You were the one who awakened first. The first rupture was never the well, it was your death. When you returned, the root recognized its buried line. Everything else followed." Eirik looked down at the stone box in his hands and felt for the first time since waking in his younger body the scale of the trap closing around them. He had not simply come back to change fate. His return itself was one of the things that had broken it.
Interlude 4. Before the wolf moon reached its zenith. Freya sat by the hearth while old Astrid pretended not to watch her. The village healer had given her willow tea, a blanket, and the kind of quiet reserved for those either grieving or dangerous. Freya appreciated the courtesy.
She wrapped both hands around the cup and stared into the dark liquid until she could almost imagine she was looking into the black well instead. The voices had grown louder since the seal broke. At first they had come only in dreams, whispers beneath the river of sleep, names spoken in languages she somehow understood even though she had never learned them. Lately they had begun arriving in daylight too, curling up through her ribs and behind her eyes whenever bloodline magic stirred nearby. "Open," they said. "Wait," they said. "He is late again." Freya did not know whether the voices belonged to gods, to the door, to old pieces of herself, or to some blend of all three. She only knew that sometimes they sounded like strangers, and sometimes they sounded like her own thoughts after they had been left in the dark too long. Eirik had looked at her differently before leaving, not with hatred. That might have been easier to survive. He had looked at her like a man standing on thin ice, trying to decide whether the shape beneath it was a fish, a drowning child, or a thing with teeth. She hated that she had lied to him. She hated more that the lie had once been necessary. She had known about the well since childhood, not clearly, never in the clean way ordinary facts live in the mind. She had known the way a wound knows weather. The well pulled at her. The field east of the village had always made her feel both homesick and ill. Sometimes, standing there, she had the uncanny sensation that if she took one more step, she would walk into another life, wearing her own face. When the seal cracked, something in her answered. She still did not know whether that answering made her victim, accomplice, or weapon. Astrid set another log on the fire. "Your brother will come back," the old woman said. Freya smiled faintly. "That is not what scares me." Astrid studied her lined hands. "Then what does?" Freya looked toward the door. "That he will come back in time." Above the roof, hidden by storm, the wolf moon continued its climb. Chapter 5. Wolf Moon, Sacrifice, and the Invitation of the Raven-Crowned King. By the time they returned to Ashen Vale, the village had gone silent in a way no living place should ever be silent. No smoke rose from chimneys, no voices, no dogs, no cartwheels. Snow lay over the lanes in smooth gray-white sheets, untouched by recent feet. Brynja reined in so hard her mare screamed. Noelle stopped beside Eirik and swore under her breath. "This is not absence," she said, "it's waiting." The village bell rang once, a single deep iron note that hung too long in the air. Red runes flared beneath the snow all across the square. The weight of the sacrifice field dropped over them like a cliff falling sideways. Brynja's horse nearly went to its knees. Eirik felt old fear crawl up his spine, not panic, but recognition. Sacrifice lattice. Somebody had drawn it under the entire village. He ran. One step into the square told him what he needed to know. The houses were there, the objects were there, but the people were not. Under the thin skin of snow and ice lay the blurred outlines of bodies stacked below the ground, eyes open, mouths moving without sound, as though they had been traded places with their own shadows. "Do not step farther in," he snapped. "Soul-lock illusion." A hand burst through the snow and seized his ankle. It was cold as grave flesh. More hands followed, clawing up from beneath the white crust. Noelle swept her bone knife in an arc and severed a dozen at once. Brynja drove her sword into the earth and sent out a pillar of silver frost that flash froze another circle of grasping fingers. Eirik cut his own palm and drove 3 runes into the field: Gebo, Algis, Sowilo. Pact, protection, sun. A golden ward spread under the three of them, giving them one clean circle of breathing room. Then Freya's voice came from the center of the square. "You took too long, brother," she said softly. "I'm holding it shut for as long as I can." The system confirmed it in savage red letters. Eirik Ashborn is force delaying the ritual. Estimated time remaining, 1 hour 13 minutes. Brynja glanced from Freya to the trapped villagers below the ice. "What did you do to them?" she asked. "Nothing final," Freya said. "I exchanged them with the shadows of themselves. They are anchors. If the rite completes, they become payment." Noelle's face darkened. Something is speaking through her. Freya gave a small, exhausted smile. "Not something, many things." The sky split above the village. A vortex of black ravens formed overhead, not real birds, but magic shaped like them, circling into a crown. Out of its center descended a figure made of royal light. White fur, silver circlet, one eye hidden. King Haldor, or rather, his projection. "My children," he said with maddening gentleness, "you have done better than I hoped." Eirik laughed with open hatred. "Do not call me that." Haldor ignored him and looked instead at Brynja. A silver command seal unfolded in the air before her, the combined authority of crown and high church. "Bring Eirik Ashborn to me. Bring Freydis alive. I will spare the villagers." Eirik watched Brynja's face with his heart hammering. On the scaffold, he had never known whether she betrayed him willingly or under command. Here was the answer. She raised her sword and struck upward through the seal. The royal sigil shattered into white rain. "No," she said. Haldor's smile thinned. "I raised you on honor." "You raised me on a prettier chain," Brynja replied. That was the moment another sealed memory cracked loose in Eirik's skull. Brynja on the scaffold, blood through her chest, screaming at Haldor that she would not hand him over. She had saved him once and died for it. Haldor's projection tilted his head. How disappointing. He lifted one hand. 12 armored figures dropped from the raven vortex like black stars. They struck the snow around the square and rose together, knights in featureless dark plate, their helms etched with stitched eyes. "Hollow guard," Noelle breathed. Brynja's expression tightened. "The king's hidden household. I thought they were a myth." "Myths are usually only secrets with better costume design," Noelle said. The captain of the Hollow Guard drew his sword and knelt to the projection. "Commence Wolf Moon Protocol." All 12 guards cut their palms and bled into the sacrifice field. The square convulsed. Freya doubled over, blood spilling from her mouth. "Freya!" Eirik lunged, only to meet a black blade. He caught it on a chain of runes and was driven back anyway. Brynja crashed into the left flank of the guards, her sword carving silver arcs through armor. Noelle tore gray wounds in the air beneath 3 of them and let hell's mud swallow them waist-deep before closing the portals. Above it all, Haldor watched with clinical patience. "What do you want?" Eirik roared. "The knowledge Odin hid from both gods and men," Haldor answered. "The door of emptiness does not open merely for monsters. It opens onto that which was cut away from the world and hidden. In the hands of a king, such knowledge rewrites order itself." Noelle stabbed one guard clean through the visor. "I am so tired of old men in love with forbidden wisdom." Brynja deflected another sword aimed for Eirik's neck. "He's stalling. The ritual needs blood and a sovereign command." Eirik looked up at Freya. Her eyes had begun to glow red from far within. He understood. She had not built the field to sacrifice the village. She had entered it first to delay it. Haldor had come only to complete what she was holding back. "Break the king's mark," Eirik shouted. "I can't hit a projection." "You don't need to." He drove a knife into his own palm and hurled blood upward in 6-layered runes. Tiwaz, Gebo, Manaz, Nauthiz, Hagalaz, Iwaz. War, pact, man, compulsion, ruin, world axis. A suicidal chain by ordinary standards. Noel swore, "That can stop your heart. Then don't let it." The chain wrapped not around Haldor himself, but around the raven vortex sustaining him. Brynja understood at once. She struck her sword into the earth and sent a spear of compressed ice straight into the center of the whirl. Noel tore a gray slash across the sky and dragged half the circling ravens into death shadow. The projection ruptured. For the first time, Haldor looked genuinely shaken. "You have made a grave mistake," he said. "You said that last time, too," Eirik spat. The king's visible eye narrowed. Not started to remember, not begun to suspect, remembered too. Haldor had returned through time as well. The revelation struck harder than any sword. His projection dissolved, but his voice lingered like poison fog. "In one branch I lost because I showed you too much mercy. I will not repeat the error." The light went out. Freya screamed. A pillar of red-black force burst from her body. The ground under the well cracked open in the shape of a giant eye. The remaining hollow guards withdrew, their forms dissolving into flocks of ravens. They had never been flesh at all, only conjured bodies sent to buy time. "It's too late," Noel said. "The wolf moon has enough opening marks." Freya looked at Eirik through tears and blood. "Open the stone box," she whispered. "No," Noel snapped. "If you open that now, the testament will hit your mind in the middle of a blood pull. It could break you." "If you don't," Freya said, voice breaking around some deeper voice beneath it, "I will kill them all." The system unfolded its cruel choices. Open the blind testament, full memory return, madness risk 73%. Kill the living lock, stop the ritual immediately. Join the bloodline, walk through the door voluntarily. No option saved everyone. Brynja looked from the box to Freya and went white. Noel fell silent. Even she did not pretend to know the right answer. "Brother," Freya said. That single word almost undid him. He had come back for her. Yet if saving her meant opening a path for the world's ruin, then what exactly had he returned to protect? The older Eirik's words came back to him. Haldor's too. A larger game than grief, a larger trap than family. He opened the box. It did not open. It dissolved. Stone turned to silver dust and sank through the skin of his hand like a swarm of living stars. Pain split him from the inside out. He heard Brynja shouting, Noel cursing, Freya crying out from far away. Then memory came in a flood. Not fragments now, oceans. His father, Leif, standing beneath bleeding roots, a rite that divided one soul into 3 parts, the human self, the key-bearing self, and the dark self built to endure what the others could not. Across countless failed branches, he saw versions of himself used as bait, forged into weapons, offered to kings, gods, and priests alike. And he saw the deepest truth. The older Eirik from the well was not simply another version of him. He was the severed shadow part of Erik's own soul, the piece Leif had cut away and hidden outside the main line. Across failed histories, that shadow accumulated memory, war, grief, and rage until it became a full being. The hunter stalking him was the part of himself his father had abandoned to save the rest. Haldor had known. In one branch, he even helped nourish that shadow into a hound he could send backwards through time. The final memory was Leif's voice. "You are not the key, Eirik. You are the final bolt. If a day comes when both light and darkness demand to use you, choose neither. Break the door itself." When Eirik opened his eyes, the system had changed. Root authority, temporarily granted. New branch, unlocked. Root admin, last ash. Noel knelt beside him, blood on both hands from holding him down, or together, perhaps both. "If you still know who I am, blink." He did. She exhaled. "Good. I dislike knocking sense back into allies."
Brynja stood in front of them with her sword raised against the tearing light around the well. "Tell me you have a plan." "I do," Eirik said, rising. "But after this, everything changes." Noel gave him a thin smile. "That seems to be our profession." He went to Freya. For a moment, in the red light, she looked exactly like the girl from the village again. Small, frightened, trying not to shake. "You remember?" she asked. "Yes." "Then you know you should kill me." "No," he said. She laughed once, in pain. "You always choose the hardest answer. So do you." He touched her brow. Their blood met. The ritual convulsed. Brynja shouted his name. Brynja tried to move and was thrown back by force. Eirik did not join their blood to open the door. He reversed the command line of the ritual. The red runes on Freya's dress blazed white gold. The black-red column bent downward into the well. Something deep beneath the village roared. The sky split open, not outward, but inward, as if a piece of heaven's skin had been peeled back to reveal a blind void behind it. From inside that slit, thousands of lidless eyes looked down. The door of emptiness was reacting. Then the older Eirik laughed from the roof of the ruined meeting hall. At last, he had returned.
Interlude V. After the door changed hands. Time after catastrophe never behaves honestly. It stretches where memory wants it to shorten. It disappears where the body most needs witness. After the battle at Ashen Vale, there were minutes none of them could account for, and sensations none could name correctly except by borrowing words from older, less sane religions. Noel remembered the taste of grave water and iron. Brynja remembered kneeling in snow and realizing the blood on her gloves belonged partly to herself and partly to a king. Freya remembered hearing silence for the first time since the voices began, one impossible, crystalline moment of silence when the door slipped sideways and no one beyond it could reach her. Eirik remembered almost nothing of the transfer itself, only pressure, only the feeling of holding an entire winter sea apart with bare hands, while roots screamed and the sky tried to look back. When he finally fell, he did not fall into darkness, but into whiteness, an endless pallor full of the after-images of branches he had not lived. In one he was crowned, in another buried, in another faceless. Somewhere Noel was dead, somewhere Brynja had never met him, somewhere Freya opened the door smiling. Somewhere Leif had succeeded, and none of them had ever needed to exist in these shapes at all. Then all of it collapsed into one small fact. He was still breathing. That alone felt less like victory than reprieve. When he woke properly, he understood one thing before anyone explained it. The door was gone from the world, and yet something impossibly heavy remained, resting against the inside of his soul, like a gate that had not vanished, only moved. Chapter 6. When the ravens left their nest and the world tree changed masters. The sky above Ashen Vale had split into an eye. Haldor's true body stood at the edge of the square, white-furred and terrible, one socket still hidden behind a silver plate,
3 high clerics flanked him. Behind him, the last flock of royal ravens circled in tight black weather. "So," said the king, "we come to the useful part." His voice no longer wore kindness. Now it carried only the fatigue and contempt of a man who had lost too many times to the same pieces and had decided at last to stop pretending he did not hate the board itself. Brynja limped into place between him and the center of the ritual, sword leveled despite the blood already soaking her side. "You will not take another step. You sound like your mother." The sentence hit like a blow. "She stood in front of me once too," Halldor said. "I regret only that she took so long to die." Something in Brynja did not break. It crystallized. "Then today," she said, "I collect the debt." She went at him with the kind of speed only great pain can produce. Her blade became 3 white arcs at once, each strike placed not where he stood, but where a lesser man would try to recover. Halldor evaded the first, caught the second on his scepter, and failed to avoid the third. A line of blood opened along his cheek. He touched it and smiled. Beautiful. Then he opened the silver cover over his hidden eye. What looked back from the socket was not emptiness. It was a complete eye of Norn, embedded in living flesh. The square seemed to lurch. This was the final twist Halldor had hidden inside all the others. He had not merely studied branches of fate, he had grafted the missing eye into himself and ridden it backward through failure after failure, refining his strategy until he stood here now, waiting for Eirik to gather every required piece for him. Light poured from the eye. Threads shot outward, invisible until they struck Brynja's limbs and the air around her. She cut several apart, but others took hold. Halldor was not binding her body, he was binding probability. Around her appeared brief after-images of possible failures, a slip, a missed thrust, a broken wrist, a turned ankle. Halldor selected the worst branch and forced it on top of the present. Brynja staggered. Noelle lunged and slashed 2 glowing threads with her bone knife. "He's weaponizing chance," she shouted. "I am administering fate." At the center of the field, Eirik was still wrestling with the reintegration of his shadow self. The severed part fought him every inch of the way. Memories from dead timelines struck like hail. Freya trembled opposite him, barely conscious, held upright by the ritual's last geometry. "He has the eye," the shadow growled inside Eirik. "You cannot beat that. Be quiet. No, I am the only part of you that stopped lying." Eirik forced himself not to resist the voice, but to hear it. That was the difference. He saw at last what his father had done. Leif had cut away not evil, but the share of pain the rest of Eirik might not survive. Left alone across enough failed worlds, pain had become hunger, and hunger had become cruelty. "I know," Eirik said inwardly. The shadow went silent. "I know what you suffered, I know what you saw, but if you win, then all of those deaths mean nothing." For a moment there was only the thunder of ritual light and battle. Then the shadow asked, with a rawness more terrible than rage, "If I come back, will you erase me?" "No," Eirik answered. "Then what?" "I bear you with me." Elsewhere, Halldor drove his scepter through Brynja's side. She dropped to one knee. Noelle tore open a gate of hell beneath the king, but he twisted the branch of chance and sent the portal swallowing a ruined house instead of himself. Then Halldor turned the full eye of Norn on the center of the square. Time slowed. Snowflakes hung in place. Blood descended through the air like thick red glass. Breath itself seemed to struggle. Noel bent under the pressure. Brynja tried to rise and found several bad possibilities, still chained to her limbs. Freya shook in the light, and Eirik accepted the shadow back.
Not as a prison, as a union. There was no explosion, only a stillness so deep it made every previous thought of peace seem childish. Memory, grief, wrath, tenderness, the urge to destroy and the urge to protect, none of it canceled. All of it remained, but for the first time it belonged in one body. User authority recognized. The system vanished. Not broken, no longer needing to speak in windows and prompts to a mind that finally understood it directly. Eirik stood. The slowed time around the square fractured under his first step. Haldor's face changed. "That is impossible!" "No," said Eirik, "only expensive." The eye of Norn in Haldor's skull trembled. It recognized a more complete claimant. The king hissed a string of royal commands and ancient invocations. Lances of pale force tore toward Eirik, while altered probabilities tried to force his body into failure, slip, severed tendon, blindness, collapse. But Eirik was no longer standing inside a single branch. He was standing at a crossing. Each bad possibility Haldor threw at him met another possibility and cancelled. The lances passed through afterimages. The real Eirik was already in front of the king. He did not draw a sword. He reached into Haldor's face and tore the eye out. The king's scream ripped across the square. Blood, light, and fate came with the crystal as it tore free. Haldor stumbled backward, clutching the ruin of his socket. Age hit him all at once. The years of branch riding, power hoarding, and future stealing descended on his body like wolves. "No," he gasped. "I saw it! I saw the throne! I saw myself!" "That was the problem," Eirik said, holding the bleeding eye in one hand. "You only ever saw the throne, never the price." Haldor came at him one final time, with a king's desperation and an old man's refusal to lose after so long. Ice pierced his chest from behind. Brynja stood there, white-faced, trembling, both hands on the hilt of her sword. "For my mother," she said. She twisted the blade. Haldor fell. The ravens above broke apart into screaming black fragments. But the king's death did not end the danger. Freed from his control, the slit of the door in the sky widened. The lidless eyes beyond it opened together. Noel spat blood and laughed once in disbelief. "Marvelous! We kill the king, and now we deal with something worse." Freya, barely conscious, turned her head toward Eirik. "Break it," she whispered. He looked up at the door, then down at the eye of Norn in his hand, then at Freya. Only then did Leif's final instruction become clear. Break the door did not mean destroy it blindly. The door was not merely an entrance for horror. It was also a pressure seam, a place where things cut from the world had been held apart. Smash it entirely, and those severed truths could flood reality without boundary. Leave it, and men like Haldor would always try to open it. There was only a third path. "You want to move it," Noel said, reading him. He nodded. Brynja, still breathing hard through pain, frowned. "Move what?" "The anchor," Noel said. "Not close it, not destroy it. Shift where it's tethered. If he has root authority, he can take the door off Midgard's sky." "To where?" Brynja asked. The smile on Noel was very small and very tired. "To the only realm built to hold what the living should not touch." "Helheim." Eirik looked at her. "You know what that costs."
"I am one of the people who might actually be able to pay it," she said. They formed a ring around the well. 4 broken people, no banners, no prophecy worth trusting, only necessity. Noel raised both arms and opened hell not as a pit, but as a horizon, gray-silver and vast, with the dead moving through it like weather. Freya laid shaking hands on the well and fed the full geometry of the living lock into the right. Brynja drove her frost sword into the ground to hold the axis steady. Eirik lifted the Eye of Norn. Inside it, he saw Haldor's branch memories, his thefts, his rewrites, his paranoia, and one final truth. Haldor had not been the first chosen by the Eye. Solveig Ashborn, Eric's mother, had. She had once served the Raven Court as a seer before discovering that the door of emptiness was no divine safeguard, but an ancient theological wound stretched across worlds. She had stolen part of the Eye and fled with Leif. Everything after had grown from that theft. There was no time to grieve it. "You have watched enough," Eirik told the Eye. "Now, witness." He drew the crystal long between both hands, not breaking it, but stretching its essence into a filament of blinding light. It lanced upward and hooked into the split door. At the same moment, Noel heaved Hell's horizon upward. Freya turned the lock pattern, and Brynja anchored the village against collapse. The earth bucked. Roots burst around the square in black and gold, climbing toward the sky like hands of buried giants. The door shrieked, not in sound, but in the mind. The slit in heaven began to move.
Not shut, not shattered, shifted, dragged out of Midgard and sideways toward Helheim, as if the world itself were levering a gate off its hinges. The lidless eyes beyond it widened. A rain of seeing descended, rays of impossible perception that cracked reality into glass veins wherever they touched. Noel bled from both ears. Brynja nearly collapsed. Freya screamed. Eirik felt his arms tearing at the shoulders. The door was halfway moved. "One more push," Brynja snarled. Noel laughed weakly through blood. "This is the worst courtship I have ever witnessed." Freya laughed too, and cried in the same breath. Eirik poured everything left in him into the final effort. Memory, rage, tenderness, root authority, blood, darkness, light. Every branch he carried became weight behind the motion. The door slid completely into Helheim. Noel slammed the gray horizon closed. The impact was not a sound. It was a soul-deep concussion that passed through forest, mountain, sea, and sky. Then silence. The slit vanished. The roots sank. Snow began falling white again. When Eirik woke at last, dawn had returned to the sky over Ashen Vale. The square was destroyed. Haldor's body lay cooling in the snow. Villagers who had been exchanged with their own shadows were returning to themselves one by one, gasping and weeping as if they had been dredged from deep water. Brynja sat against a broken post, side wrapped in a blood-soaked bandage. Noel lay on a slab of fallen stone with one forearm over her eyes, but when she heard him stir, she still found breath for mockery. "You look worse after saving the world," she said. That made him laugh, which reassured him more than anything else. Dead men do not laugh. Then he saw Freya. She lay near the ruined well, hair spread over the snow like a spill of fire. He crawled to her and touched her hand. Her eyes opened. "I'm still here," she whispered. He let out a breath he felt he had been holding since the scaffold. "Yes." She smiled faintly. "This time you chose right. This time we both live." Freya's eyes moved past him, to Brynja, to Noel, then to the sky.
Not exactly. She placed 2 fingers over his heart. A mark surfaced beneath his shirt and skin, roots circling a broken dark moon. Noelle sat upright the moment she saw it. Brynja went still. "What is it?" Eirik asked. Freya's voice was soft and almost apologetic. "You moved the door out of Midgard." "Yes, but when you did, it needed a new anchor." Silence swallowed the square. That was the last twist. The door of emptiness had left the world, but it had not disappeared. It was bound to him now. Eirik Ashborn was no longer only the man who survived fate, nor merely a king's condemned weapon, nor a brother trying to rescue the girl he loved too much to question. He had become the new living bolt of the door. Not a god, not a king, a walking lock between worlds. He lifted his head and looked at the dawn spreading over the village, over the mountains, over a sky at last emptied of ravens and wounds. Somewhere very far away, beyond roots and bone and dead seas of knowledge, a gate had changed owners, and his story, in truth, had only just begun.
Eirik, now the living anchor of the door, becomes the target of gods, the dead, and every surviving court that learns what he is. Brynja, having killed her king, is branded traitor and hunted by the very order that raised her. Noelle must pay the cost of bringing Helheim into direct contact with Midgard. Freya survives, but the mark of the living lock remains, meaning the ritual itself has not been erased, only delayed. One final secret still waits beneath every twist. Who first taught Halldor to travel backward across the branches of time?
Hey there! If you enjoy our audio content, don't forget to hit that like button and share this video with your friends. Most importantly, click subscribe and ring the bell to stay updated with everything Zuzu Audio. Support the channel and join our community today.